Jax's revenge domain. I'm not the kind of guy who thinks the world owes me something because I've been around a long time. But 13 years in one operation does something to you. You stop measuring time in holidays or birthdays. You measure it in crises you prevented, problems that never happened because you were the one who noticed the weak link before it snapped. My name is Jason Mitchell, 49 years old, and that operation was Mid-South Industrial Solutions outside Atlanta. We handle automotive parts distribution and supply chain for the Southeast. Not glamorous, not tech, not changing the world, just JIT delivery schedules, OEM contracts, carrier relationships, and a system that could either keep Ford's component plant running or cost them $500,000 per hour if it went down. I didn't start out as operations. I started as the guy who stayed late because the inventory management system was crashing and nobody else knew what that error code meant. The guy who answered a supplier at 11 p.m. because if I didn't, the morning shift wouldn't have the parts they needed, and Tuesday would turn into a disaster. Over time, people started saying it like a joke. Ask Jason, he'll know. At first it felt good, like I mattered. Later, I realized it was a trap. Because when you're the person who always fixes things, leadership stops seeing you as someone who should move up. They start seeing you as something they can't afford to move. By year 9, the titles around me changed. Directors became VPs. A new COO came in and restructured. HR became people operations. We got new mission statements, new values posters, new quarterly all-hands meetings with the same promises. But my desk stayed in the same place, right between the warehouse floor and the conference rooms, close enough to hear executives talk about numbers, close enough to hear forklift drivers talk about reality, and in the middle I learned the truth of corporate life. The company didn't run on strategy. It ran on whoever knew how to keep the wheels from coming off. That was me. My boss, Kevin Palmer, was the kind of manager who loved credit and hated detail. He wasn't evil. That's the thing people don't understand. He didn't wake up trying to destroy anyone. He just wanted to look competent without doing the parts of the job that make you competent. He'd walk the floor twice a week, clap people on the shoulder, say things like, "We're a family," and then disappear into meetings where he'd repeat whatever I'd told him the day before, like it had been his idea. I tolerated it because I told myself it was temporary. Management changes. People leave. Eventually the numbers speak, right? Eventually someone notices. The thing about automotive supply chain is you can't fake expertise. When Ford's plant manager calls at 2 a.m. because line 3 is down waiting for cylinder heads, you either know which backup supplier has inventory or you don't. You either understand which carriers can make emergency runs without violating DOT regulations or you don't. I'd built those relationships over 13 years. I knew which dispatchers would take my call on weekends. I knew which plant supervisors would work with you on delivery windows and which ones would write you up for being 10 minutes late. That knowledge doesn't come from training programs or MBA case studies. It comes from being the guy who shows up when things break. Then 2 years ago, the company brought in a new HR business partner named Brandon Hayes. If you've ever worked in a corporate environment, you know the type. Polished, always smiling, always using the right words, alignment, bandwidth, stakeholder management. He spoke like he was reading from a playbook and somehow always sounded like he was doing you a favor. At first, Brandon barely noticed me. Then he started scheduling these check-in meetings, not with the team, with me. Just want to understand the operation, he'd say. So I explained. I showed him what contracts were fragile, which carriers we used as backups, where our margins actually lived, why certain OEM SLAs mattered more than others. He nodded, took notes, asked smart questions. For the first time in a long time, it felt like someone was finally seeing the real work. Someone understood that when I stayed until 8 p.m. to route emergency shipments, it wasn't just dedication. It was the difference between Ford meeting production targets and shutting down a line that employs 400 people. Around that same time, rumors started drifting through the building. Kevin was being considered for a regional role, which meant his director seat would open. It was the obvious next step. 13 years, no write-ups, top performance reviews. I had trained half the supervisors in that building. I'd mentored 3 junior analysts who went on to operations roles at other automotive suppliers. I could tell you which clients would blow up over a 10-minute delay and which ones didn't care if you shipped 2 days late. If the company was a machine, I knew every sound it made. I understood the seasonal patterns, the model year changeovers, the plant maintenance windows that could make or break quarterly numbers. That kind of institutional knowledge doesn't transfer easily. You can't download 13 years of relationship management into a training manual. So when the calendar invite hit my inbox 3 weeks later, my stomach actually tightened. Subject: Org Update. Attendees: COO, HR, Kevin, and my entire department. Time: Friday, 3:00 p.m. No agenda, no context, just org update. I'd been through enough restructures to know that good news doesn't need mysterious calendar invites. When they want to celebrate your promotion, they don't schedule it like a funeral. That whole Friday, the air in the building felt different. People were nicer than usual, like they knew something I didn't. Kevin avoided my desk. Brandon walked by twice and smiled at me in a way that felt rehearsed. The warehouse supervisors kept glancing toward the office area like they were waiting for an announcement. I tried to focus on the weekly carrier performance reports, but my mind kept drifting. Every time my phone buzzed with a text from my daughter asking about her spring semester tuition payment, the knot in my stomach tightened. At 49, with a divorce behind me and retirement still 15 years away, I couldn't afford career setbacks. The timing had to be right. At 2:58, I walked into the conference room and took my usual seat near the side, close to the screen, close to the door. Then I saw a new face already sitting at the table. Late 20s, crisp suit, perfect haircut, new laptop. She looked like she belonged in corporate headquarters, not in an automotive parts warehouse. She stood up, extended her hand like we were at a networking event. "Hey," she said, warm and confident. "I'm Jessica Torres." I shook her hand. "I'm Jason." "I know," she cut in with a quick smile, like we were already friends. "I've heard a lot about you." Seriously. That should have felt like respect. Instead, it felt like the moment someone says your name in court. Because she wasn't looking at me like a teammate. She was looking at me like someone she was about to inherit. The COO walked in. Brandon followed. Kevin sat down and the room went quiet in that corporate way where everyone pretends they're relaxed, but you can hear the HVAC hum like it's too loud. The COO clicked the remote and put up a slide, a simple org chart, and my name wasn't where it had been for 13 years. It was one level lower, under Jessica. Then the COO said the sentence that still makes my jaw tighten when I replay it. Effective immediately, Jessica will be stepping into an expanded leadership role over operations. Applause started. Polite, automatic. I didn't clap. I couldn't. Because what my brain was doing in that moment wasn't anger, it was math. I was calculating what happens to a company when the person who knows how it actually runs gets demoted beneath someone who's been here for 4 months. And while the room smiled and nodded, Brandon's eyes flicked toward me just for a second, like he was checking whether I would behave. That's when I understood this wasn't just a promotion, it was a test. And if I failed it, they already had a plan for what to do with me. The meeting continued with the usual corporate theater. Jessica talked about bringing fresh perspectives and leveraging synergies. The COO mentioned digital transformation initiatives and agile methodologies. Kevin nodded along like he understood what any of it meant. Nobody mentioned the fact that Jessica had spent 4 months in the building, most of it in meetings and training sessions. Nobody talked about the relationships I'd built with every major automotive supplier in the Southeast. Nobody acknowledged that when Nissan's plant in Smyrna had a line shut down last month, they called me directly at 6 a.m. because they knew I could get emergency parts delivered by noon. After the meeting, people filed out quietly. A few supervisors gave me sympathetic looks. The warehouse manager, a guy I'd worked with for 8 years, stopped at the door and said, "This is garbage, Jason. Everyone knows it." I appreciated the sentiment, but sympathy doesn't pay college tuition or rebuild a retirement fund. Jessica lingered as the room emptied. "I'm really looking forward to working with you," she said. "Brandon's told me so much about your expertise. I want to learn from you." The words sounded right, but her tone felt like she was reading from a script, like someone had coached her on what to say to the institutional knowledge guy who might resist change. "I'm here to help," I said, "because that's what you say in moments like this, even when you know help isn't what they're looking for." That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in years. I updated my resume, not because I wanted to leave, because I needed to remember what I was worth. 13 years of automotive supply chain management, crisis response coordination, carrier relationship, carrier management, regulatory compliance expertise, Client retention in a volatile industry. On paper, it looked impressive. In reality, it felt like documenting the career of someone who'd been taken for granted. Monday morning, Jessica showed up like she'd been there for years. Same confident smile, same crisp shirts, same let's keep things positive tone that people use when they're about to make your life harder. She didn't walk the floor first. She didn't ask the supervisors what was breaking. She didn't check the overnight delivery exceptions or review the carrier performance metrics. She went straight to the conference room and sent out a meeting invite titled Operational Alignment, New Workflow. Everyone on my team, me included. Brandon from HR, Kevin and Jessica sitting at the head of the table like she'd earned the chair. She started with a compliment. "I've heard this operation runs because of the people in this room," she said, looking around like a motivational speaker. "And I want to honor what's been built here." Then, without taking a breath, she clicked to the next slide. A new org chart. My name was still under hers, but now my responsibilities were different. She'd boxed me into process support and documentation, not operations leadership, not execution, not decision-making, support. Like I was an accessory to the job I'd been doing for 13 years. I kept my face neutral. Not because I was calm, because I knew what reacting would look like to HR. I'd seen this movie before, the experienced employee who couldn't adapt to change, the one who became the problem. Jessica went on. "We're going to tighten communication," she said. "Create clearer lanes, reduce single points of failure." That phrase, single points of failure, landed like an insult dressed up as strategy. Because we both knew who she meant. Me, the guy who'd been keeping everything from failing. Then Jessica said the thing that turned my stomach. Starting today, all vendor communication funnels. Through me. I blinked. "All of it?" She smiled like I'd asked a cute question. "Yep. We want consistent messaging." Consistent messaging. We had suppliers who only delivered on time because I knew which dispatcher to call after hours. We had one client who would threaten to cancel over a single late delivery unless I called them personally and explained the fix before they saw the miss in their portal. That wasn't messaging. That was relationship management, trust, history. And Jessica wanted it to funnel through her like it was a help desk ticket. "That's not realistic," I said, looking at Brandon. "There are escalations that require immediate response. When Ford's line supervisor calls at midnight because they're missing cylinder heads for the morning shift, you can't wait for approval to make carrier calls." Jessica cut me off politely. "That's why I'm here. To take that burden off you. Off me." Like she was doing me a favor by taking away the only leverage I had. The meeting continued with her assigning new owners to things she didn't understand. A supervisor who had never negotiated rates suddenly got carrier performance. A junior analyst who still asked me how to run basic reports got KPI dashboards. The warehouse manager who knew the floor but had never dealt with automotive compliance standards got regulatory oversight. And me, the person who knew where every operational body was buried, got process documentation. Like I was being demoted to company historian. When the room cleared, Brandon stayed behind. He closed the door softly and smiled. "I know change can feel personal," he said, "but this is about growth for everyone." I'd learned over the years that HR doesn't say things like that unless they're trying to calm you down before they do something worse. I kept my voice steady. "So why wasn't I considered for the role?" His expression didn't change. "Jessica has leadership presence," he said carefully, "and she's been very proactive." Proactive? I'd been proactive for 13 years. The difference was my proactivity kept the building running while hers showed up in PowerPoint presentations. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, "And honestly, you're so critical where you are. We didn't want to disrupt the operation." There it was, the real answer. They didn't promote me because I was too useful to remove. They didn't want to disrupt the operation, so they disrupted me instead. That afternoon, Jessica sent her first email to vendors. I know because 3 carriers called me directly within an hour. "Hey," one dispatcher said, voice tight. "Your new manager just threatened chargebacks for late pickups. We've been flexible with you for years because we know automotive can be unpredictable. What's going on?" I stared at my screen. This was a carrier who'd made emergency Saturday deliveries for us, who'd rerouted trucks during ice storms, who'd covered for us when other suppliers failed. And Jessica had just burned that relationship with corporate boilerplate. Another call came in, then another. By 4 p.m., our biggest client, Ford's component plant, sent a message labeled urgent, demanding an explanation for delivery terms changes that could affect their production schedule. Jessica had tightened messaging so hard she'd started a fire. I walked to her office, because yes, they gave her one, and knocked. She looked up like I was interrupting something important. "We have a problem," I said. "Carriers are calling. Ford's escalating. Your email changed terms without consultation." She lifted a hand, calm. "Relax," she said. "They're just adjusting to a new standard." "A new standard? You can't threaten chargebacks on day one without understanding the relationship history. These carriers will drop lanes." Jessica leaned back and smiled like she was teaching me. "That's fear talking," she said. "We're not begging vendors anymore. We're establishing professional boundaries." Professional boundaries? That phrase hit me like she'd spit on the last decade of my life. I wasn't begging vendors. I was keeping a supply chain intact with relationships and credibility built over 13 years. Relationships that understood the difference between standard logistics and automotive just-in-time delivery, where a 2-hour delay could shut down an entire assembly line. And now someone who'd been here 4 months was burning it down because it looked unprofessional in an MBA textbook. I left her office without arguing. Not because I agreed, because I finally understood the new game. If I saved her, I would become her safety net forever. If I let her fail, the company might burn with her. And despite everything, I still cared too much about the people on the floor to let that happen. But I also wasn't going to be the scapegoat when it all fell apart. So that night, I opened my laptop at home. Not to plot revenge, not to scheme, just to protect myself. I pulled up everything I'd ever kept organized and clean. Performance reviews, email threads where I'd prevented disasters, documentation I'd written, old approvals from legal and compliance. Then I created a private folder and started copying what I was allowed to keep. My work product, my notes, my process records. Not confidential files, not trade secrets, just proof of what I'd done and when I'd done it. Because I'd seen this pattern before in other companies, other restructures. When leadership makes a mistake, they don't admit it. They find someone underneath to blame. Someone who resisted change or failed to support the new direction. And I was already perfectly positioned to be that someone. Near midnight, my phone buzzed. A text from one of the warehouse supervisors. "Heads up. HR was asking who has admin access to the JIT system, specifically you." I stared at the message for a long time. That wasn't a normal question. That was the kind of question you ask when you're preparing to cut someone off and make it look justified. The next morning was when everything really started to unravel. Tuesday morning, my badge still worked. That shouldn't have been comforting, but it was the first thing I checked when I walked in. I'd been through enough restructures to recognize the early signs. HR asking odd questions, IT suddenly reviewing access, leadership using vague words like alignment while they quietly rewrite reality. When I got to my desk, there was an email from IT with a subject line that made my stomach drop. Access review, JIT platform, action required. It wasn't aggressive, it was polite, corporate, friendly. But the request was clear. Confirm your current roles, list systems you administer, and acknowledge that admin access may be reassigned to match updated reporting lines. Reassigned. In other words, Jessica wanted the keys. I didn't ignore it. I replied with facts. What I had, why I had it, what controls existed, and which access changes could cause outages. I CC'd Kevin because I'd learned the hard way that if you don't leave a trail, someone else writes your story for you. 10 minutes later, Jessica appeared at my desk like it was casual. "Hey," she said, leaning on the cubicle wall. "I saw your email." "Yeah," I said. I responded. "You should be careful with admin changes on JIT. If you break delivery logic, you'll feel it within hours." She smiled the same calm smile. "That's why I'm standardizing it. You've been carrying too much. I want it centralized." "Centralized where?" I asked. She didn't blink. "Under leadership." Then she lowered her voice like she was trying to be reasonable. "Let's make this easy," she said. "Can you send me your admin credentials, just so I can get in and review settings?" I stared at her. "No." Her smile tightened. "It's not a big deal." "It is," I said. "We have policies. Accounts are assigned to individuals. You want access? I can request you a role-based admin account through IT. That's how it's done." Jessica's expression turned from friendly to annoyed, like I'd failed an unspoken test. "Fine," she said. "I'll handle it." Around noon, the first thing broke. Not dramatically, not movie-style crash, just a slow, quiet failure. Exactly how real operational disasters begin. A supervisor came over holding a printout. "Why are these loads not assigning carriers?" he asked. I took the paper and scanned the exceptions list. JIT deliveries stuck in pending, carriers not being assigned, routes defaulting to generic settings. That meant one thing: configuration changes had been pushed. I logged in to check, except I couldn't. The system kicked me out with a plain message: "You do not have permission to view this module." They had stripped my admin rights while the operation was live. I walked straight to IT. Our local IT manager, Scott Williams, was the kind of guy who hated drama and loved tickets. "Scott," I said, "I just lost JIT admin. Who changed it?" He glanced at his screen. "That came from an approved request. HR submitted it." Brandon signed off. Jessica as the new owner. Did the request include a change window, a test plan, rollback procedures? Scott shrugged helplessly. It was marked urgent. They wanted it effective immediately. By 2:30 p.m., Ford was calling. Not emailing. Calling. Their shipments were time-sensitive, regulated, tracked. They didn't tolerate alignment. They tolerated results. "Your portal shows a missed pickup on lane 12. "Is that real?" their coordinator asked. "It's not real," I said. "The system is misrouting orders. I'm escalating internally right now." Then I walked to Jessica's office without knocking. She was on a call. When she finally muted, I held up the printout. "Your access change broke delivery logic," I said. "Ford is escalating. We need rollback or temporary admin restoration." "I didn't break anything," she said. "It made the change. It executed your request," I said. "There's a difference. We can fix it, but I need access." She stared at me, then said something that told me exactly who I was dealing with. "If you're the only one who can fix it," she said, "that's exactly the problem. Maybe we need to ask why the system is so dependent on you." At 3:05 p.m., I got a calendar invite, urgent incident review. When I walked in, Brandon was already seated with a folder. Jessica sat relaxed like she was hosting. Brandon slid a sheet across the table, an acknowledgement form with one line that made my blood run cold. "Employee confirms no independent access changes have been made outside approved leadership direction." It was a trap. If I signed, any future fix would look unauthorized. If I didn't sign, I'd look uncooperative. I pushed the paper back. "Before we talk about blame," I said, "can we look at the ticket and audit log that shows exactly who requested the access change and when?" Scott from IT cleared his throat. "I have the ticket number." He read the timestamps, explained the lack of change window, admitted the request was marked urgent from HR. The room went quiet. In that moment, they weren't in control of the facts anymore. By Wednesday, Morning, Ford sent a formal notice, PDF with late penalties and service failure language. They copied their procurement director, the kind of person who doesn't call to argue, they call to replace you. Around noon, the COO stormed out of his office and walked straight to Jessica. "Why is Ford escalating to me?" She tried to smile. "We're dealing with a legacy dependency issue." I handed him a timeline I'd prepared. Dates, ticket numbers, timestamps, no emotion, just facts. The COO read it, then looked at Scott. "Is this accurate?" "Yes," Scott said. "Those are the logs." The COO turned back to Jessica. "You pushed a critical access change mid-week without a change window." Then to me, "Can you restore stability if we give you temporary access?" "Yes," I said. "If IT restores my role-based admin and we roll back the changes, controlled, documented, do it," he said. By 3:00 p.m., my access was restored. Scott sat beside me while I walked through the rollback. We tested deliveries, validated assignments, watched the exception queue drain. Just as I started to feel the adrenaline fade, an email hit my inbox. From legal. Request for interview. Operational access incident. Friday morning, legal met with me. Outside counsel and internal audit in a windowless conference room. Jessica and Brandon weren't there. That told me everything. I slid a folder across the table. Timeline, ticket numbers, email replies, the HR form they tried to make me sign. No emotion, no speculation, just receipts. Did anyone ask you to share credentials? The attorney asked. Yes. Jessica asked for my admin login directly. That's a bright red line in most companies. The auditor's head lifted. When they were done, the attorney said, "Please do not discuss this matter while we complete our review. If anyone pressures you to sign documents or accept separation, notify us." At 2:25, Scott messaged me. They pulled Jessica's admin access. At 4:50, the COO asked me to step into his office. "We're making adjustments," he said. "Jessica will no longer oversee operations. HR is also being reviewed. Brandon is being reassigned." He slid a document across the desk. "Interim operations lead, effective immediately. Compensation adjustment, clear scope, requirement that access changes need proper change control." They weren't giving me power as a favor. They were giving me responsibility because they'd finally learned what happens when you treat institutional knowledge like disposable support. I signed it calmly, went back to the floor, and did what I'd always done, made sure the operation ran. But this time people looked at me differently, not like the guy who fixes things quietly, like the guy who couldn't be erased anymore. The best part wasn't that Jessica lost her title or that Brandon lost control. The best part was this. I didn't win by yelling or scheming. I won by keeping records, staying professional, and letting facts do what facts do when they finally get a room to speak in, because in corporate life, karma doesn't show up as lightning. It shows up as legal audit and a quiet email that changes everything.